Why, hello there. I'm sure you're wondering why I called you all in today. And that's because it is time for Groovy Grab Bag Volume 21. The way this show works is it serves as a video diary of sorts, kind of chronicling my ever-evolving musical listening journey. Every month I try to listen to between 35 and 40 albums, though recently it's always been leaning closer to 40, and I rank them from worst to best based off of my enjoyment of them. These lists are basically curated based off of recommendations from friends, family, recent releases that I have a bit of an interest in, and I also incorporate the entire discographies of at least one artist. This month's artists include Deftones, No Doubt, including the solo works of Gwen Stefani, and finally Blake Shelton, because I decided that violence sometimes is the answer. I want to make this clear, these albums were listened to way the fuck back in November of last year, because I decided to prioritize my holiday projects between the Christmas episode and the New Year's releases, so I'm doing my best to try to recall some of these memories as I can. But even with a written guide in front of me, it's been a while, to say the least. So this episode might be a bit rustier than some of my others, but let's see what I can do here. Let's not waste any more time, let's go ahead and jump right the heck into it. Number 40, Based on a True Story by Blake Shelton. I have OCD, and part of having OCD is that sometimes your intrusive thoughts are a bit morbid. My therapist used to tell me that acting on these morbid intrusive thoughts was called petting the rattlesnake. Rattlesnake's sitting there, it is warning you that if you try to pet it, it will bite you. And you know deep in your heart that you shouldn't pet it, but you're still curious. So you lean down, you reach your hand out, it bites you, and you bleed, you bitch about it. But hey, that's just part of life sometimes, right? See, when I started my Blake Shelton deep dive, part of the reason why I wanted to listen to him is because I wanted to see what the heck Gwen Stefani sees in this dude. I knew that the vast majority of his work was just boring, typical, right-of-the-dial radio country, and I knew he had an era where he covered bro country, and I knew that it was going to suck ass, and yet I still pressed the play button anyways. And I still see online, there are some people that think that this is Blake Shelton's most revolutionary work. And I gotta question the mental sanity of those people, but I don't have enough time. It's loud, it's obnoxious, it doesn't shut the fuck up about boys around here drinking ice cold beer. I'm gonna reference that line a lot, all throughout this episode, just so that way you understand how frequently this man uses that phrase. This makes you want to beg country music producers to just keep the genre forever stuck in the 1990s. It's also bizarrely horny. Probably the best way to think about Blake Shelton is he's like a golden retriever. He's a dipshit at the end of the day, let's face it, okay? But he's also trying his best every now and then. When he's a good boy, he sits in your lap, he entertains you, and it's kind of fun to watch. When he's at his worst, he's sitting there humping your leg and you can't get him to stop no matter how many times you throw him off. This thing is just really fucking cliched and stupid, and oh god, I keep saying the word obnoxious, but that's the word I keep circling back to. I got a lot of other Blake Shelton albums to talk about. The man has more works than any of the other artists I covered, and you guys are gonna be sick of me talking about him. And this album doesn't help that fact. D-. Number 39, If I'm Honest by Blake Shelton. You know what's weird is that the album in between, Based Off of a True Story and If I'm Honest, was actually less bro country and was actually one of the better Blake Shelton albums. It's almost like he took a detour, decided to be classy for a little bit, and then decided, yeah, no, fuck that, I need to increase my record sales again, so here's more fucking bro country. The only difference is this one's slightly less obnoxious, it's slightly less derivative, it makes you want to jump off a building just 5% less. I honestly don't have much else to say, and you're gonna find that that's the case for the bulk of Blake Shelton's discography. D+. Number 38, Tears of Hercules by Rod Stewart. Oh boy, the most recent album of original music, and allegedly the last one that he's going to do. Here's the thing, I want to make it clear. I acknowledge that back in the 1970s, Rod Stewart was considered a sex god. I understand that it can be kind of hard to reckon with aging and having to let that part of yourself go, right? But that doesn't mean that that element of yourself seeping its way into your music when you're pushing fucking 80 isn't still cringy and weird. And that's kind of the biggest problem with this thing. So I've been reviewing one Rod Stewart album per month for the last year, and this is the last one. Guys, I can't keep doing this. I'm gonna run out of interesting Rod Stewart material. Eventually I'm gonna have to start doing the good shit. And one of these days I will hit up the good shit, because I'm pretty sure one of those early albums gets at least an A+, if not an S for me. But with this being his swan song of original material, I was expecting this to be bad, but worse than it actually was. It's hard to describe, because the first half of this album is a bunch of dance pop music. You're just asking yourself, why the hell is this geriatric man doing this? Isn't he worried about throwing out a hip or something? And it's not the worst electronic music that I've ever heard, nor is it even the worst electronic music I've heard Rod Stewart do. But it is very fucking cheesy, and it's dude, you're hopping onto this bandwagon almost 2 decades too late. But the second half of this record isn't nearly as bad as the first. It touches up on some of those old blue-eyed soul elements that Rod did so well in his early career. It has some callbacks to those Motown-esque sort of moments that he had in the late 80s and early 90s. And it doesn't have the same level of warmth and likability to it, but it's also harder to hate that half of the album. And it leads to an album that ultimately is a bad album, but an album that you're just all do I really hate it that much? This one was an interesting listen in telling the ending story to Rod Stewart, but ultimately it just made me say, okay, I think I've milked this for all it's worth. D+. Number 37, The Sweet Escape by Gwen Stefani. This is the worst, no doubt adjacent thing that we'll be reviewing today. And I'm one of two minds. On one hand, I do think that a good chunk of her pop music gets an unfair amount of hate, especially from men. And on the other, I don't think it's as revolutionary as a lot of people claim it to be. This is an album that Gwen really didn't want to make. And you can feel it. There's just not as much oomph in these melodies. This album doesn't have any cool ideas it's presenting to the table. I'm gonna be honest, neither have the other 2 recent Gwen solo albums, not counting the Christmas release. And this album does have a couple of really good moments on it. The title track is one of Gwen's most famous solo tracks. And a couple of the more dreamy tracks on here help float this thing up from being a downright bad listening experience. But the bulk of this is these really ugly sounding Timbaland adjacent tracks. It almost feels like this album exists out of pure fucking spite. You could tell that her heart was in some of these tracks, and then the rest was just all yeah, the label's making me do this. Sorry, I don't know what else to do. This is what I'm putting out there. And it's just sad, because I should not be feeling annoyed by Gwen Stefani. Those emotions should be reserved for the Blake Sheltons and the late era Rod Stewarts of the world. Number 36, Body Language by Blake Shelton. This is the second most recent Blake Shelton release, and there's just not a whole lot to it. I mean, it's just fucking radio country, but even some of the most run-of-the-mill Blake Shelton albums have something I can say about them. Maybe a song or two, maybe something that kind of catches my attention, even just a wee bit. Not this one. This one was just one song after another doing the same exact shit I've heard off of radio country since the late 90s into the early aughts. Even the bro country albums at least elicited a reaction out of me. Ask me what songs are off of this record. I don't know, I don't remember, I kind of don't care either. Get ready for a lot of meh reactions coming up. C. Number 35, For Recreational Use Only by Blake Shelton. Just more of the same, but maybe with a bit more pip in its step, I want to say. These songs at least are pretending to have a bit more fun than they were on the previous record. And see, I know that there's going to be a lot of people watching this thinking I'm just offended by Blake because he is a country music artist and country music represents the South and conservative values and whatever. He represents the boys round here drinking ice cold beer. And the thing is I wish I could say I was offended by him. At least then I would have more interesting shit to say. This man is just there wasting your time. I got nothing else to say. C+. Number 34, Blake Shelton's Barn and Grill by Blake Shelton. Okay, now I'm offended. You gonna make a fucking dad joke on me here, Blake? Listen here, Blake, you stay at least 3 whole ass states away from me at any given time. Goddamn, there's so many fucking drinking songs on this album. This is the most boys around here drinking ice cold beer album that Blake has ever done. You know what's really funny is that if you play this album back to back with an album like For Recreational Use Only, you would not know that there's 21 years separating these two albums. 21 years in a whole bro country era. You would just assume, oh, yep, that is most certainly generic radio country. Thank you so much, Blake. Just shows you how little the genre has actually evolved. It had its stupid little fad in the mid-2010s. It made people crash their car off a bridge, and then they just went right back to doing the same thing they were doing before. C+. Number 33, Startin' Fires by Blake Shelton. Divorced boys round here drinking ice cold beer. This is his second post-divorce record. Yeah, it's more of the same fucking complaints. I'm sorry, this is what sucks about reviewing artists like this. Most of Blake Shelton is just doing the same thing over and over and over. I really hate reviewing stuff like this because I don't got anything else to say. It's just like, if you're a fan of this type of music, you're sure gonna get a whole lot out of it. You may not have anything deep or profound to say, but you'll get exactly what you ordered: serviceable radio country that you can play in the background and not really give a shit about. What really irks me is that just so much of this material doesn't really tell us about who Blake is. He kind of curates his songs based off of stuff written by other people, maybe a handful of songs that he wrote himself, but they're never about his own personal experiences. They're about all of these hypotheticals. And while country music did kind of build itself partially off of myths and legends, those were interesting stories being told. I'm not saying I genuinely believe Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings were outlaws in the 1800s, but they sold it and they made it good. And I'm not saying that these everyday stories don't have a time and a place. It's just they tend to be more effective when they're actually about something that you've lived. This is the second album that contains the song I Don't Care, which was first released off of the previous album, Pure BS. And that song wasn't very good on the previous album. It definitely wasn't good here. See, Blake likes to throw in these songs that have these really weird lyrics. Like, the few times you're starting to get your glimpses into the brain of Blake Shelton, it's for some reason these weird, cringy little glimpses. So what makes this song so cringe is that it tells the story about this man that's like watching the driveway of his ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, and he notices there's a second car there, and there's another man coming out spending a whole lot of time with his ex. And the thing is, he just starts kind of lying to himself. I don't care. He can have her. And it's like, sure, buddy, like there's a reason why you're stalking your ex's driveway. It's like really fucking creepy behavior when you think too much about it. Did I say think too much about it? No, it's very obviously creepy ass behavior. And then suddenly at the end of the song, she calls him up and she's like, oh yeah, sorry I haven't reached out to you in a while. My brother was visiting me. Anyways, I miss you. Can you come back? And suddenly he cares again. Fucking dumb fucking lyrics. And trust me, this isn't even the beginning of the insanity. But it does make for a more entertaining listening experience when these albums are sprinkled with those types of songs. C+. Okay, I'm tired of talking about this man. Can I please talk about something interesting? I said something interesting, not something that's gonna get me eviscerated by basement dwellers that never left their mom's house. Okay, I know I just made a fucking spicy-ass meatball of a take, but let me be clear, 95% of Deftones fans actually don't give a shit what other people say about their precious little band. But Deftones are one of those bands that, much like Metallica, Tool, Tyler, the Creator, their most passionate fans stick out like a fucking sore thumb, and it's really annoying. You say anything even somewhat critical, even just a little bit critical, about an album that most of the rest of the fans are like, yeah, that's kind of their weakest work, and suddenly you're getting like these essay-length fucking comments telling you about why you're incorrect and that you didn't give the album an honest listen or something. Okay, so this album is like the one modern Deftones album that just really didn't click with me. And what's weird is that this is right off the heels of probably what I would consider the pinnacle of Deftones. They were doing like these really cool atmospheric shoegaze adjacent albums, and then they released this, which should be more of the same. But there's one very huge disconnect here, and that's that one of their guitarists, Steph, was just sick and tired of doing the shoegaze thing. He wanted to kind of harken back to the old days, just a little bit. He wanted to be able to chug a little bit here and there, and he kept being told he couldn't do that, so therefore he kind of clocked out during the production of this thing. And you can tell because we get a whole lot of Chino stuff, but we don't get the complementary aggression that comes from Steph's guitar lines. And that's kind of the biggest thing about this album, is that this feels like Chino's side project more than it does a mainline Deftones record. In the production, oh my fucking god, you know I bitch about the Loudness War production so much on so many albums. And yes, there's a good chunk of albums that I have landed into my S tier that are also victims of the Loudness War, but the difference is a good chunk of those albums, they're enjoyable despite them being victims of the Loudness Wars. These albums that are just lacking in general quality, whenever they start doing the brickwalling stuff, it just does not work in their favor. The mixing on this thing, it needed a second once-over by somebody who wasn't Chino. And I like Chino Moreno's ear a good chunk of the time. And yes, I know one of the songs had Jerry Cantrell of Alice in Chains fame, and yes, I will be eventually covering the Alice in Chains discography later this year, and that is one of the better moments on this album, but most of this is just very mid, bland, boring. I don't want to waste my time with it again. C+. From one hot take to another, number 31, Rock Steady by No Doubt. There are 3 No Doubt albums that are very consistently considered classics by at least a few people. Return of Saturn, Tragic Kingdom, and this one. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I am nostalgic for some of the songs on here. I listened to Underneath It All. It's a genuinely sweet, like, love-making song. And I did already review this in my Music of the Year 2001 series, but I really need to reiterate some of those talking points again. This album is just kind of a bit of a mixed bag, with only a handful of, like, really great tracks on here, including the title track, which includes these really intense vocal layerings. And that together with Underneath It All and Runnin', I'm not gonna lie and tell you that there aren't moments that I enjoy off of this thing. And I also get it that there's a lot of people that don't like it when people trash this album because it's just supposed to be this fun dance album. And I do have a good chunk of fun dance albums in my pantheon. I mean, there's that fucking Anthony B album. Yeah, That's Life, also released in 2001. Another really great dance hall album. But the problem with this album, and I know I'm getting into a bit of a race argument, is that it is very much anglicized dancehall music. It's dancehall with a lot of its spice taken out. There's no political layerings. That's kind of part of what makes dancehall so revolutionary, is that 99% of it is very political. You're getting onto the dance floor, you're shaking your ass to overthrow the government, you know? It just lacks a lot of that inventiveness that the best dancehall music has. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that No Doubt has made a career out of stealing the music done by minority groups. In addition, this thing just isn't that interesting from start to finish. And hella good, I'm sorry, that's a butt rock song. It is not a good song. You're remembering it falsely. Hey Baby is a stupid, brainless song in the way that Lamb would later go on to fix. C+. Number 30, Texoma Shore by Blake Shelton. This is the beginning of where Blake doesn't shut the fuck up about Gwen Stefani in the lyrics. Or at least he's writing about Gwen Stefani from the point of view of somebody else writing from his point of view of Gwen Stefani. I don't know, it's fucking confusing because most of his songs are not written by him. This is still run-of-the-mill radio country, but it's a little bit better. Sometimes Blake likes to throw in a lot of really pretty sounding ornamentation on these albums. Like, hey, there's some really thick backing vocals, or hey, that's a really nice lap steel solo in the background. And the more bells and whistles he throws into his albums, the more listenable and interesting they are. They never do enough to elevate these listening experiences outside of the B tier, but hey, I take those over the fucking bro country and really generic boring albums any day of the week. And what's really interesting is that this album has probably one of my favorite Blake Shelton songs on it, and it goes by the title Turnin' Me On. Oh boy, that title, you just know that that's gonna be the dad rock anthem of the decade, right? Actually, it's a lot more Fleetwood Mac adjacent. Okay, yes, I know, still dad rock, but you know the type of dad rock that Gen Zers tend to enjoy. It has just really fucking solid ass guitar work on it, and it's a legitimately sexy song, I will admit. But the rest of this is just still very middle-of-the-road country with maybe a few extra moments that perk up your ears here and there. B-. Number 29, Red River Blue by Blake Shelton. I was readying myself for pain on this one. This is because a lot of the guides that I found on Blake Shelton's discography says that this was the first bro country record he made. But the thing is that bro country was still in its embryonic phase at this time. It would take a couple more years before other artists started to catch on to the whole big and rich mentality. So when I spun this and it turned out to be really not even a bad listening experience, I was pleasantly surprised. Pleasantly surprised in the, oh, we're having macaroni and cheese for dinner instead of salad sort of surprise, not the, oh, hey, you made a gourmet meal for me instead sort of surprise. Although one of his worst songs is on this album, Get Some, which might as well just be a pro-capitalist propaganda piece. Oh hey, everyone's overworked and not making enough money. Let's just all work harder. That'll make us less stressed, right? But I don't know, this is one of his less problematic albums, and again, it still has a lot of that really cool ornamentation thrown in to make it less miserable. B-. Number 28, This Is What the Truth Feels Like by Gwen Stefani. This was written just before she met Blake Shelton. Hell, most of the lyrics on this thing talk about her divorce and her experience with Gavin Rossdale. And there's a lot of people that defend this record because it does tell a very painful divorce story that a lot of women do relate to. But I do go based off of sonic appeal first. And this thing does just feel like a run-of-the-mill record, with a couple of nice little decent pop songs thrown in. I will say that the song Used to Love You is definitely a highlight off of this album for me. I'd actually heard it a few times working in retail radio back in the day, but it wasn't Gwen's version, it was done by some no-name singer. But Gwen's version is much better, and probably one of my favorite solo songs by her. Overall, it's just a very okay to somewhat good pop record, and at the end of the day, that's perfectly serviceable. Maybe to some people, this is one of the greatest things ever, and I won't blame you for thinking that. B-. Number 27, Self-Titled by Blake Shelton. Oh boy, the saga begins. Being the very first Blake Shelton album, I didn't know that there would actually be songs off of this thing that I would recognize, and it still has a lot of the trappings of typical 2000s era Blake Shelton, where it's just run-of-the-mill country music. But with it being his first record, there's a lot more personalization in the lyrics than what we would get in the future albums. It's just very quirky, and not necessarily in a good way, but that's part of what made this album so entertaining. Alright, let's go through these absolutely bizarre lyrical highlights. On the song She Doesn't Know She's Got It, Blake tells the story of a really hot woman that doesn't understand that she's hot when she dances. Spoiler alert, she probably does, and it's just Blake fantasizing about being the man that's able to make her feel secure in her looks or something. Problems at Home is a prayer song where instead of trying to pray for the problems that like many other people all around the world face, he decides to say, but what about us poor widow Americans? And I'm sorry, pointing that out within the lyrics itself doesn't absolve that song of that issue. Most of us Americans kind of live a bit of a pampered, privileged lifestyle, at least back in 2001 anyways. Same Old Song is a generic country song where Blake bitches about how generic country music sounds. But there's two songs in particular, which if you've listened to radio country at all over the course of the last 25 years, I guarantee you've heard these songs. The first one is Ol' Red, and as ridiculous as that song is, with it being about a man who breaks out of prison by romancing the bloodhound that usually sniffs them out when they try to escape, it's actually honestly one of Blake's most charming songs. Like, I wish he did more weird shit like that, because it's a very enjoyable track. The other song, oh man, that fucking Okay, so I need to explain a bit of lore regarding my childhood. So when my dad remarried back in the early 2000s, it was to a woman that liked to blast the fucking country music station all day, every day. And there was one song, every time it came on, it just haunted my fucking childhood. I remember spending long hours in the car waiting for my stepmother to finish grocery shopping, waiting to pick up the step-siblings, whatever it was. And I would hear the various songs that would play on the rotation, and there was one song that was stupid even to me at the age of 10, 11 years old. And see, I don't always check the track listings of these albums before I play them. I figure it's a fun little game of Russian roulette every now and then. But when this song came on, I audibly fucking screamed, because it was like I knew this song still existed. Somewhere in the back of my head, this song still floats around in there, and it hadn't been activated for the better part of 2 fucking decades. And you'd think I would be smart enough to know, with like the fucking album art saying, featuring the #1 hit song. So when Austin comes on and I hear the fucking chorus, if you're calling about the car I sold it, yeah, I lost it. I fucking lost it. I'm like, no, I wasn't ready for this. I didn't want to lose my fucking sanity today. For those of you that aren't familiar with the song Austin, it's about this couple that breaks up, and the woman is very much like not over the man and decides to call him, and she can never get a hold of him, and she keeps making it through to his voicemail greeting. And this was back in the day when people would kind of personalize their voicemail greetings sometimes, like to kind of update people on the general happenings in their life, kind of state what times they're probably more likely to be available based off of their plans that week, whatever. And that's how those choruses are structured. And it can seem kind of clever if it weren't for the fucking fact that the scenario's dumb as shit. Like, the entire song is just fucking wish fulfillment fantasy for divorced dads. In the final chorus, it has this fucking key change, and he's really hamming up the goddamn theatrics. And finally, the dude answers, and she speaks directly to him, and she's all like, "If you're calling about my heart, it's still yours." It's just like, what the fuck, dude? This is so stupid. How is this the #1 hit song in 2001? Like, how did this song kickstart the career of Blake blander than stale KFC corn biscuits Shelton? B-. Number 26, self-titled by No Doubt. Show of hands, how many No Doubt fans actually knew that the band existed for almost an entire decade before they exploded in popularity? Congratulations, you're a bunch of nerds. Dweebs, music history enthusiasts, welcome to the club. Yeah, this was the very first No Doubt record released all the way the heck back in 1992. And is it any good? Kinda, sorta. Here's the thing, No Doubt kind of built up this massive reputation in their native Anaheim, California for their killer fucking live shows. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the musicianship on this thing is really fucking stellar. The problem is that a live setting doesn't always translate the best into a studio sound. And this is still pretty early in the band's existence, so the famous tension that makes some of their best albums work is still not exactly there. Gwen Stefani still hasn't completely come into her own. She's still very much Madonna influenced. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it doesn't make her stick out just yet. And also, the production on this thing is just all over the place. The drums sometimes feel like they muffled the mic with like a wet towel. It just lacks the punch that a lot of later No Doubt albums would be famous for. It's just not that great of a listen personally. B. Number 25, Thirsty or Not, Choose Your Flavor by Coal Kitchen. This was a recommendation by one of my guitarists, Eduardo. Eduardo likes his really obscure 1970s to 1980s local music from various scenes, and this was a band from Indianapolis that was very well known in the city for being multiracial, multigender. Everybody played an equal role in contributing, and that's pretty cool, and that kind of carries over a little bit into if there were to be a theme this month for that whole multicultural, multi-gender angle, right? With both Deftones and No Doubt being very strong examples of that, maybe not so much Blake Shelton. And what this is fairly competently done 1970s era rock, funk, disco adjacent stuff. It's very groovy, it's very typical for that genre, but hey, if you like typical, if you like that type of stuff, I think this would probably be a lot more up your alley. If you're looking for something that kind of does something unique, reinvents the wheel a little bit, you might want to look elsewhere though. B. Number 24, Bringing Back the Sunshine by Blake Shelton. This was that weird detour album in between his two big bro country releases. There's maybe a smidgen of bro country on here, but what this is mostly very competently well done radio country. Some of these songs are actually quite catchy, and I found myself not dozing off and checking my watch as much as I was on the other Blake Shelton releases. This is also the album that features the song We Don't Have to Be Lonely Tonight, a song that I will admit makes me sing along because it's undeniably catchy. Look, buddy, you get on my good graces, I'm gonna be kinder to your album. B. Number 23, Bouquet by Gwen Stefani. Oh boy, look at all those 1.5 star ratings on various music websites given by white dudes that have no respect for pop music. Watch me roll my eyes into the back of my fucking skull. You guys are insufferable. You guys are joyless. You guys think that you're able to give concrete opinions on music that was clearly not fucking written with you in mind. Is this a life-changing album? No. Am I simping for it? Also no. You guys treated this like it was one of the worst things that Gwen ever did. And I just have to ask, did you guys even bother listening to The Sweet Escape? Because that's where the actual butt-ass ugly songs are. Nah, this is just typical country pop. It's very Taylor Swift adjacent. She sings a bunch of sweet songs dedicated to Blake Shelton, answers a lot more questions than Blake ever answered. What does she see in him? Well, he's a dependable man, a lot less messy than the other men that she's dated. That's a lot more that we've learned from her about Blake than Blake's ever told us about himself that wasn't dug up by various internet historians and detectives. And a lot of people have asked what the hell happened. Gwen used to be known for innovating. And I don't know, this type of thing happens to anybody that suddenly comes into contact with Scrooge McDuck money. It's relatively inoffensive, I can somewhat enjoy it, and honestly, I think that earns it a B grade. Number 22, The Dreamer by Blake Shelton. This album frequently ranks really low whenever you can find the few people that bothered to listen to the entire Blake Shelton discography, and that's mostly because, it doesn't have that many singles on it. And let me just say, singles is not a quantifier of quality. A single doesn't necessarily become famous just for being a good song by virtue, for Pete's sake. But what this album has is tons and tons of lovely ornamentations. So much cool little bells and whistles thrown into this thing that actually work in the album's favor more often than not. I mean, hell, the song The Baby actually kind of jerked at my emotional chain a little bit. Don't get me all teary-eyed, Blake. That's the song that's like genuinely emotional in a way that Austin could never even dream of being. That being said, whoever thought the song Playboys of the Western World was worth putting on this album, you need to be put in an insane asylum. What it is it's a song about a bunch of white dudes that go to Mexico with the whole goal of picking up chicks. Yeah, it's just as dumb as you think it is. But what's even dumber is the fact that he throws in this sha-la-la-la-la-la-la after talking about brown-eyed women. Gee, I wonder who he's paying homage to. Find me at least one Blake Shelton album without at least one batshit insane moment and I'll hand you $1 million. B. Number 21, The Divinity of the Seas by Ahab. Hi there, random German dude I don't remember the name of that I met at karaoke like 3 months ago. Yeah, as you guys know, I take requests, and sometimes when I have a one-off meeting with somebody, I'm like, I'll totally take your recommendation. This guy went up and sang Iron Maiden like a goddamn champion, and he told me about this band called Ahab. Funeral doom metal, probably right up my alley, right? Except he chose like one of the not debut records by these guys. Ahab is pretty notorious in doom metal circles because their debut is known for being an exceptionally great album, and everything they've put out since has just been diminishing returns. And it's not because the band is like losing their creativity, it's actually quite the opposite. They're trying so hard not to repeat themselves that they end up losing a lot of their edge because they're overthinking the art form. Now, I know that there's a lot of Ahab fans that love every single album that these guys have put out, and especially if you're into like the nautical themes that this is talking about, both from like the mainstream English literature like Moby Dick to like even some really obscure German shit, it's gonna sweep you off your feet because it's the nerd shit. But if you're not already into that, this has a very limited appeal to it. The musicianship is still mind-blowingly good. I mean, I'm not gonna rip into these guys' riffs or their heaviness or the drums, but it didn't exactly do an amazing job at maintaining my attention throughout the entirety of its runtime. And that's what makes me just somewhat sad, but I still want to hand these guys their flowers. B. Number 20, Adrenaline by Deftones. If you need me to really show you how much I respect Deftones, the fact that only one of their albums was in the bottom half of the list should tell you everything that you need to know. This album isn't so much a bad album as it is just kind of not really much of a showcase of what we would get later. It's a respectable debut, don't get me wrong, but I definitely feel like the reason why they were going for this sound was because of pressure from the record label to recreate the success of Korn. Now, it was very informative on the next 2 to 3 or 4 albums that they would put out, considering they would continue to be nu metal adjacent for at least the first half of their career. But these confessional, angsty lyrics aren't exactly doing anything new, besides just showing off that the band does have a really powerful synergy to them. A synergy that would continue to translate and coalesce with each subsequent release. It just sucks that there aren't any songs that really make you go, wow. This is just more or less the band's introduction to the world, and not even a full, proper one at that. I get some people within the fan base really do like this album, but me personally, I'm just gonna go with a B. Number 19, Push and Shove by No Doubt. This is the most recent No Doubt release, and if my gut is correct, I'm pretty sure it will be the last No Doubt record. And the whole reason why is kind of stated within the context of this record to begin with. Nothing on this record exactly screams that Gwen and company had anything new to say. It was just more or less, hey, we haven't released a new album in over a decade, let's get around to making one. And while some fans are pretty fond of this thing, I just don't think it has enough strong energy to justify its existence. It just kind of floats in its own vacuum quite a bit. Sure, there's still some reggae and ska bits here and there left over from the previous eras, but by this point, No Doubt had definitely turned into more of a new wave band or more of a pop rock act. Tony and Gwen never really stopped musically collaborating, even in Gwen's solo career. And I think they get a lot more out of that collaboration than they do trying to revamp No Doubt. And sure, No Doubt is still technically together as a band, but they go more on tour than they do record. And personally, I think that that's a respectable place to be at this point. It's better to continue to give great performances, much like they started, right? Than to continue to pretend like they have any motivation to write any unique music. But yeah, this is just a serviceably good No Doubt record, nothing mind-blowing about it. B. Number 18, Pure BS by Blake Shelton. And here we have it, the very last Blake Shelton record on this entire fucking list. This is his first of his 2 divorce records that were back-to-back between 07 and 08. And while Starting Fires is just more the typical frickin' radio country of its day, this album does have a lot more sentimentality to it. A bit more of an attempt from Blake to show his bleeding heart, if you will. Not much of one. It's still kind of questionable how many of these songs are coming from an actual place of genuine intent versus how many of these were written by other people, but at the very least you could tell he's using the project as a catharsis to move on from his divorce. And sure, while the initial version of I Don't Care is on here, and yes, that song still sucks even on this album, I feel like there's a bit more of a sense of outreach to the listener, to try to speak to them, to try to emote. There's still drinking songs on here, but they're less I'm going to the bar to have a good time and more of a I'm clearly drowning my sorrows sort of energy. And we've all been there, even if I'm a recovered alcoholic and I don't have the same coping mechanisms that I used to, I can still kind of relate on a certain level. And of course, we still get some really lovely instrumentation, a lot of really good ornaments just thrown in there, and Blake's at the top of his form vocally for a lot of these tracks. Again, it's not the most revolutionary thing, but I don't think Blake Shelton was ever trying to be. He's very much a Nashville dude. And that's where I'm gonna answer the question where a lot of people ask, why did you even bother, Randy? And the answer is because I thought it would be funny. I was reviewing No Doubt and I just started being like, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if I forced myself to sit through the Blake Shelton discography as well? And did I learn anything? No. Did it tell me anything about Blake Shelton as a person? No. It's one of those few discographies that I took on in order to commit to the bit, and I kind of regret it. There's so many other more interesting artists that could have filled that void, but I did what I said I was going to do. I finished it. This is the best that he got. B+. Number 17, Self-Titled by Deftones. If you read about the production of this album, it answers a lot of the questions about why it sounds the way it does. The thing about this album is not that it's bad. It has some really great energy to it. We're still dealing working with 5 amazingly talented musicians. It's just that they all kind of had their own individual plans of how this album is going to sound. It feels like you're being tugged in a few different directions between Chino's more shoegaze-inspired stuff that was starting to leak its way into this project because Team Sleep was not being lifted off the ground fast enough, and of course some of the more nu metal influenced stuff that Steph really wanted to bring into the project. And this album does have one of my favorite Deftones songs on it, in the form of Anniversary of an Uninteresting Event. But the thing is that at the end of the day, this is another one of those mixed bag albums. One of the better types of it, and not even the only one in the Deftones discography. Sounds like a record that doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up. But personally, I'm just not really sold on it. Maybe some of you like the eclecticism that is presented here, but I like it a bit more when Deftones has a bit more of a focused vision. Eclecticism works best when it fits a vision, and that vision isn't all part of the collective here. B+. Number 16, You'd Prefer an Astronaut by Hum. So there I was, age 20, at my local Zia record shop, specifically the one on Speedway and Country Club in Tucson, Arizona. I mention that because I'm going to give you guys a bit of useful information in just a moment. So, I was looking for some new shoegaze records, and I asked one of the store clerks, do you have any shoegaze albums that you would recommend I check out? And told me I should listen to this Hum album, You Prefer an Astronaut. And I shit you not, there was like an entire section of the shelf where there was just a bunch of factory-sealed brand new copies from 1995. I guess what happened is they had like a massive shipment of this album way back when, and they just were never able to fully deplete themselves of their supply. But anyways, I picked this thing up, I gave it a spin, and I wasn't particularly blown away by it. Now, for this particular episode, this was a suggestion by Prozac, longtime fan of the channel. And he wanted me to listen to it because this is one of those records that is highly informative about how Deftones started to sound the way they did towards the later era of their career. Because Chino Moreno referenced Hum, specifically this record and Downward is Heavenward. The thing about this record is like the first 3 songs are all fucking bangers, especially Stars. I know it's typical for people to sing Stars' praises to the high heavens, but it is one of the quintessential 1990s songs for a reason. The textures on those first 3 tracks are just absolutely fucking stellar. But the problem is that the band starts to get a bit more experimental, a bit more avant-garde, and they start to lose me a little bit. And that's what kind of happens in the middle. I feel like there's this stretch of like 2 or 3 songs where there's just a bit of a lull. You build me up with this amazing energy, and then you knock me back down, but not in a way that fits the pacing. I'm not saying a record can't do that. As a matter of fact, some records suffer as a result of not settling the fuck down. And then we finish off fairly strong with a couple of really good tracks that don't quite match the energy of the beginning, but it makes up for that dip in quality. And that's kind of how I felt about it back in the day, and it's how I feel about it now. I feel like most people prefer Downward is Heavenward, but this is the album that gets listened to more frequently because specifically Chino referenced it. And I just want to tell you guys, yes, this is an informative record, but you guys are skipping over fucking Catherine Wheel and Downward is Heavenward. You guys give this album way too much credit just because it has Stars on it. You guys need to listen to Chrome. You need to listen to Ferment. That will tell you so much more about how Deftones started sounding the way they did. Or just listen to Deftones. I mean, Deftones kind of answer your own questions as you proceed through the discography anyways, at least in my opinion. And the big piece of information I'm going to tell you is that last I checked a couple of weeks ago, Zia Records on Speedway and Country Club in Tucson, Arizona still has a massive amount of copies of this album, brand new sealed CD from 1995, So if you're still looking for this record, jump on over to that location. Number 15, Anarchy by Busta Rhymes. This was a suggestion from fan Corey. I was kind of dreading this record because I was looking at that runtime, 78 freaking minutes, okay? And that's a very long runtime. That can either mean that you have a lot to say and you actually pull off using that runtime to your advantage, or you end up tripping over yourself time and time again like I do sometimes. I was expecting Busta to do that thing that he does whenever he's a featured artist on somebody else's track where he's rapping at a mile per minute. But no, I wasn't expecting Busta to actually be capable of slowing down and actually kind of breathing with his own music. Now, there's nothing revolutionary about this album. This is definitely a product of its era, if you ask me. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of albums can be described that way. This is definitely an album that was released around the same time as Eminem, still kind of living in the shadow of Outkast, not quite knowing where to take things because Kanye West hadn't come into the picture yet, and the blueprint was still another year away. But it's still a very enjoyable listen for a 78-minute long fucking album, dude. Like, sure, none of these are amazing, the beats are quite catchy, and Busta does start to kind of sniff his own farts a little bit too much on here. I understand he's trying to rap about the traumas that people of color face in the hood and stuff like that, but I feel like Wu-Tang Clan are like a better mouthpiece for that, or Kendrick Lamar. Busta's trying his best, but he's not really that great at coming up with applicable metaphors, but I do have a lot of respect for him even trying to begin with, as a lot of rappers were just not even bothering. B+. Number 14, Saturday Night Wrist by Deftones. This is probably the most divisive record in the Deftones discography. Everybody kind of agrees on Gore, everybody kind of agrees on Adrenaline, everybody kind of agrees on the self-titled, but this one really splits the fan base at the hairs. Some people feel like it's an absolute colossal mess of an album that it just illustrates even more how much chaos was going on within the band at the time. Other people think it's a misunderstood work of genius. I am one of the few people, not one of the only, I'm not going to claim to be the only person, but I'm one of the few people that kind of stands in the middle here. This thing is a mess, but it's an interesting mess to say the least. See, at the time that this thing was being recorded, the band was kind of completely split up. Again, they're tugging this album in different directions, but it does kind of feel like they're trying to implement something of a vision at the same time, which results in a bit more of a cohesive album, but not fully. You're still hearing some of the more shoegazy textures, but the problem is that like Chino was high out of his mind and the other band members were starting to eyeball like side projects of their own. Chino was also much more dedicated into his side project Team Sleep, and it can feel at times that Chino's kind of phoning it in. The band was on the brink of breaking up, and they were pretty sure that there was a chance that their next record might not even happen. And of course, there's a whole story regarding the next album, but we'll get to it when we get to it. It was a troubled production, and you can feel that tension in here, and while we're starting to get a bit more balls deep into the shoegazing textures, we're still feeling some weird little artistic attempts to decide other directions to take the band in. Other directions that wouldn't ultimately stick, but that results in this album sounding quite a bit more experimental than the typical Deftones release. But it does contain my least favorite Deftones song in the form of Pink Cellophane, which is one of those songs that's just like abrasive and gross for the sake of being abrasive and gross. Look, I'm not really big at shock value when it comes to music. It's either good shit or it's not, and I just kind of rolled my eyes at that one. I don't know what in the world Chino was trying to go for. I'm gonna go with a B+. Number 13, Love Angel Music Baby, aka Lamb by Gwen Stefani. You know what's interesting about Lamb is that it does try a lot to innovate. In many ways, it actually did. I want to make this clear before I get into my review here. This album is undoubtedly very informative of what would happen with pop music over the course of the next 20 years. And in the case of a couple of tracks, we're still feeling the ripple effects. Need I say, songs like of bubble pop electric sound like a proto-hyperpop song. There's a reason why TikTokers gravitate towards this thing, because fans of Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, they can all draw some through line of influence to this album. The self-aware winks at the camera, the constant jabs at celebrity culture. I'm not gonna lie, this thing is pretty entertaining. The use of synthesizers that would start to show us like the 1980s nostalgia that would take over pop music for the better part of the next 2 decades, that was all started with this album. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm really nostalgic for a lot of songs off of this record. Cool is one of the sweetest post-mortem breakup songs I've ever heard, with some of the prettiest 1980s era sounding synthesizers that I've heard in modern pop music. Holla Back Girl is the type of dumb trashy shit that Hey Baby thought it was. I'm sorry, I don't care, that's a fun song. I don't care if it's stomp clap. I don't care if the lyrics are all talking shit and whatnot. I'm still gonna sing along whenever one of my queer friends goes up and sings that song at karaoke. It's a damn good time. It's a fucking bop. Get over yourself. And of course, there's the wildness that is bubble pop electric. Like, what even is that? That is such a wild fucking song. And sure, there's a lot that can be said about the Harajuku cultural appropriation stuff. We're not gonna get into that because it's not really my lane. And I am impressed by the fact that so many of these songs are fucking bangers. Like, I just kept saying to myself, hey, I remember this. This is a great song. But what's weird is that there's still this hollow sense that permeates throughout this album. For as intelligent as the satire is, and as catchy as these songs can be, a lot of this album leaves me longing for a bit more of a human connection. And I get it, for a lot of people, the disconnect is part of the point. She's still, like, just satirizing the over-commercialization of pop music. But personally, I just feel like that emotional disconnect results in me and myself not fully connecting to the album itself. A bit of reverence, but still a lot of apprehension on my part. A-. Number 12, the Beacon Street Collection by No Doubt. This is the second No Doubt record, and one of 2 albums that would be released in 1995, although this one was being worked on over a much longer period of time. See, this album was completely self-funded, self-recorded, self-produced, in their own studio on Beacon Avenue. Wait a second, that's not the name of the album. You said Beacon Street Collection. This was recorded on Beacon Avenue. You fucking liars. F. Anyways, Gwen and her merry band of fucking liars cobbled this together because they were dropped from their previous record label due to the low sales of the self-titled. And this thing has a lot of thrills, a lot of chills. It's a highly effective record in introducing us to the dynamics that would make No Doubt the behemoth that they are today. See, the key to No Doubt is tension, emotional tension specifically. The tension that you can hear in Gwen's voice, the tension that you can hear between musicians. It builds the intensity. There's a lot of noodling around, but noodling around in the best way, if you ask me. And while they're still honing their craft here, still figuring out their studio sound, I do feel like this is a major step in the right direction and highly indicative of what was coming next. A-. Number 11, Around the Fur by Deftones. Oh boy. Alright, guys. Look, there's a bit of a generational divide when it comes to the opinions of this album. Gen Z thinks it's one of the greatest rock records ever created, whereas millennials are all like, sure, it's good, it's a step in the right direction, but Deftones would get better than this. And I'm a part of the latter camp. I used to be part of a band called Ocean Void, and the drummer for Ocean Void was very much into Deftones. And he had me go through their discography years ago, one at a time. And when I listened to this, I was like, it's better than the debut, but still not that great. And he was like, yeah, I agree, it's not as good as White Pony. But now that I'm listening to it with the context in which Gen Z listens to it, I try to take that into account. Like, I read what they have to say. I will say it's no longer the B tier that I thought it was, and that I've elevated it a bit, but not too terribly much. So how do I feel about this? Well, first off, I think a lot of people understate how many effects pedals you could start to hear even this early in the band's discography. Sure, it's not cavernous, it's not necessarily shoegaze adjacent, but you could start to hear the experimentation take off. Like the effects pedals came first, the shoegaze experimentation came later. This is more psychedelic in nature in some regards. There's still a bit of that youthful frat boy-ish energy that can be had on here. And I know that label is constantly clashing with Deftones to this day because it's a misrepresentation of what the band was. Probably more of a result of bad marketing than anything, especially with that album cover, for Pete's sake. But these songs are a lot of fun, very thrashy, very high energy. Chino Moreno starts his more psychosexual vocal delivery, for instance. He hasn't fully enveloped himself into criticizing the world of toxic masculinity just yet, but he is definitely adding to his edginess in a good way, if you ask me. I also think this is one of the best albums that shows off the bass work of Chi Shang. You can definitely feel the high energy groove in the bass. The drums have this idiosyncratic fucking crunch to them, and this album does fuck. But I also feel like Deftones start to deliver more goods when they start to develop more of a concept around their music. And we would see that in the future releases, but this is not just a step in the right direction, but a giant leap from the debut. A-. Number 10, Holland by the Beach Boys. This was another suggestion by a third fan of the channel. I just wanted to say first off, I'm sorry I made you wait all the way until January. I didn't forget about you, I just had to prioritize other things because of the holidays. Secondly, I did actually end up quite liking this record. See, I've been listening to Beach Boys records kind of scant, really spread out. And this is another one of those Beach Boys records that is held in very high regard. My problem with 70s era Beach Boys is it's very inconsistent. A lot of the albums will have lovely individual moments, whether it's Dennis Wilson starting to hone his craft as a songwriter, or like the suite of 4 tracks all penned by Brian Wilson on Surf's Up. But the problem is that sometimes Mike Love is strutting his shit a bit too hard on some of these tracks, and it starts to lean a bit into cock rock, or Brian Wilson's just a bit too high out of his mind in order to give us anything that's focused enough to deliver. But this is the Beach Boys album of the 1970s that I would argue is probably the best one. All it took was isolating them in Holland and keeping them away from their family and friends back in sunny old California. See, sometimes going to another country and isolating is a great way to find inspiration for music. Other times it's a great way to find inspiration for music because you're homesick, and that's what 90% of this album is about. But hey, it resulted in one of the strongest records of the Beach Boys' later career. I am gonna go with an A- on this puppy. Number 9, Eusexual Afterglow by FKA Twigs. Leave it to you to have to stealth drop a new album and make me have to drop Danny Brown. Sorry, I just didn't have enough open slots, so this is the one blockbuster release I covered this month. What this was is it was supposed to be like a collection of outtakes from Eusexual that Twigs ended up looking at and saying, nah, I ain't done with these. I'm gonna vamp these up and make a new album out of them. And I will say that given that usually when an artist does that, it's very transparent that it was a flop, this was actually really fucking rock solid. I liked this collection of songs. Is it as good as Eusexual Part 1? No. But it does get relatively close. Now, I did kind of pick apart the previous FKA Twigs record lyrically because if you listen to shit like Magdalene, it kind of like sets you up to expect her work to be lyrically picked apart, but she actually ripped into a lot of critics that did that, because she's like, it's not that deep. You're reading way too far into this. I'm just a horny girl making horny music. What the hell are you doing? I guess I could say I was being a bit of a cringe lord back in January of 2025. I mean, when you put a bunch of like weird visuals in your music video that are designed to shock, you would think that there's something underneath the surface. But anyways, this album's supposed to be more about like the afterglow of the rave, but regardless, it's still got the typical FKA Twigs of subversion of basic pop tropes, the constant experimentation, the weird little sound effects. I'm gonna go with an A- on it. Number 8, Diamond Eyes by Deftones. After the absolute messes that were the productions of the self-titled and Saturday Night Wrist, you would think that things couldn't get any more dramatic. Turns out that they went back into the studio in 2007 in order to potentially create their next album. They started arguing amongst each other. They were pretty sure that the project was dead in the water. But then in 2008, tragedy struck when bassist Chi Cheng was involved in a car accident, and his injuries were so severe that he would be stuck in a coma for the next 5 years before he would ultimately pass away in 2013. However, instead of basically cementing the end of the band, it ended up kickstarting a whole new era, a whole new renaissance of Deftones. Chino and Steph ended up putting their differences aside and married together the shoegaze textures that Chino was starting to play around with the new metal chugging riffs that Steph was very good at. This is the band just getting together, making great music again for the first time in a decade. Chino also sobered up, and I feel like that clarity is felt on this album. And their musicianship started to turn even more on a dime than even on records like White Pony. Man, this album is just so fucking great. It might not be up there with like the all-time best Deftones albums, at least in my personal opinion. I feel like Koi no Yokon serves as a bigger tribute to Chi than this one is. But again, I'm not gonna argue with somebody that thinks that this is the best Deftones release. I mean, come on, it's just such a sweeping album. A. Number 7, Half Cut by the Blue Tile Lounge. Why hello there, Prozac. You actually didn't recommend this one. This one was recommended by my friend Lecce. As soon as you requested lowercase last year, my friend Lecce is like, so when are you getting to Half Cut? That is the better album. See, this album is basically in Lecce's top 5 all-time favorite albums, because he has to be the contrarian. He has to go with the more obscure release by the already obscure band. And if you ask me, I kind of agree with him. This thing, production-wise, fixes a lot of the problems with the first album. We don't have to deal with as much room noise, and I feel like the overall energy is a lot more collected and together. These songs don't drag as much, they don't meander as hard. And also they started experimenting around with a female vocalist, somebody who they ultimately planned on adding to the band before they broke up. And the band is still just as much obsessed with texture on this album as they were the previous one. It's still an absolutely great record. Might not be my all-time favorite slowcore album, but still, A. Number 6, Ohms by Deftones. You'll need to excuse me for kind of brushing over this one. Keep in mind, it is still a really fucking great record, and it's still very much in the same vein as most of the Deftones records from the last 15 years or so. Very shoegazy, very heavy, very visceral. It's just, I'm trying to make this list a little bit tighter, and a lot of the compliments I have to pay this one, I'm gonna pay other albums that I have coming up. So I'm gonna give you my grade, and we're just gonna move along with an A. Number 5, Return of Saturn by No Doubt. Fame is a bitch and a half, and the band No Doubt started learning that lesson right around 1996. Yes, Tragic Kingdom was released in 1995, but it took a couple of months for the radio airplay to start to pick up. But Jesus Christ, did Tragic Kingdom turn this band into an absolute fucking behemoth. And a lot of the band members just weren't entirely comfortable with being thrusted into the levels of fame that they were. They went from being a very popular local band that released a couple of albums albums that had some international recognition to one of the biggest alternative rock bands in existence. They spent the better part of 3 years promoting that album, with the final singles from Tragic Kingdom coming out in 1998. And when they went into the studio to record for this album, they were very much overworked and disillusioned with the music industry. Gwen started asking a lot of questions. Am I ever gonna see my life calm down? Am I ever going to get married and have kids? How is fame going to affect my ability to live something of a normal life? All of her other friends were starting to see their lives become realized to a certain extent, because the American dream is supposed to be to start a family, right? And here Gwen is having found success through her fame, but still ultimately kind of empty. And that emotion is felt deeply and viscerally all throughout this album. Musically, this album is one of No Doubt's moodier pieces. It's got a couple of catchy moments, but it definitely broods. It steams. It's darker in the sense that a lot of rock music started to become darker and edgier in the late 90s and early 2000s. But unlike a lot of its colleagues, it has a lot more to say. Even Tony himself is starting to get more complicated with the harmonics of these songs and the arrangements. Ultimately, it results in a very satisfying No Doubt record that I think gets underappreciated more often than it doesn't. A+. Number 4, White Pony by Deftones. Please note that the previous album also got an A+. I think highly of this, it's just not my favorite Deftones album. This is the album that a lot of Deftones fans absolutely get hyped over, and I can see why. This thing is nearly fucking perfect. There's like one song that I don't like, and I think a lot of people will kind of start to debate me over that one track. Look, let's just get the one negative out of the way. Teenager is just a song that I think sounds too rhythmically and harmonically hollow. It's a bit too calm. But the rest of this thing, oh my god, fucking chef's kiss of an album, dude. First off, the band's musicianship is just completely fucking top tier. They come in steamrolling over everything, and they don't fucking relent until the very last notes. There's this looming party animal energy just like on around the fur, but the band is starting to say basically, I'm getting too old for this shit. The headache is setting in. They're starting to realize that, cocaine isn't worth doing every single fucking day. I mean, the title itself is allegedly a reference to cocaine, although that's been heavily debated. And so this album has a vision. Its vision is to dismantle conceptions about human behavior. What drives us to self-destruct, basically. Chino's vocals are way more aggressive on this than they arguably have been on most of the other Deftones records. The screaming coming from this guttural place of utter confusion. The lyrics are their most psychosexual yet, with Chino basically ripping into toxic masculinity. There's these violent sexual acts being sung about, but instead of being fetishized, it almost speaks as dark satire. Why do men feel the need to behave like this? Why do they feel the need to conquer, victimize, to dominate? When Chino feels this deep-rooted need to just emote and be sensitive and vulnerable, it's almost like a complete desecration of how men are supposed to express themselves in the realm of rock music, all without sacrificing the masculine energy at its very core. Digital Bath is one of the most gloriously beautiful songs in the Deftones catalog, and the lyrics are deceptively gruesome. I feel like this album tricks you into thinking it's just a simple good time, but when it comes to analyzing the lyrics, you realize that this thing is trying to challenge you. It's trying to get you to question the very nature of rock music in and of itself. And honestly, that's a clever little trick that they pulled here. I respectfully give this album an A+, and we're gonna move along. Number 3, Private Music by Deftones. Yep, it's that good. See, I initially talked about this briefly in my Japan episode because I had a lot to say about all the other albums on the list, and this was like the blockbuster release of the month, and I didn't want to pad out the time by talking about it too much. And after listening to the Deftones discography, a lot of the positive shit that I have to say about this record, again, it applies to one very specific album. You guys know what's coming, basically, from here on out. But yeah, no, it still does a lot of the shoegaze, Deftones stuff justice. I would say that this is probably their most democratic record. Everybody's willing to make compromises, everybody's meeting somebody somewhere in the middle. It still harkens back to their new metal days in some ways. Sure, we're not listening to the fucking turntable sounds, but there's still some chugging going on in the guitars, and this is probably one of their most aggressive records, which is impressive for a band that has started to soften up a little bit and become sentimental in recent years. But if there's one word that can be used to describe Private Music, it is thunderous. This is a massive wall of sound that does not relent until the very end. And in some ways, there's some really romantic moments on here as well. I Think About You All the Time is one of the most gorgeously written Deftones songs. Please take my A+. I love this record. It was the one that got me to listen to the entire discography. Number 2, Koi no Yokon by Deftones. Look, I know that Deftones didn't top my list, but this album was the one that really pushed me over the edge for Deftones. This is the best shoegaze record that Deftones has ever made. I don't expect that a good chunk of the fan base is going to agree with me personally when I say that this is the best one from my point of view. But you gotta keep in mind, I'm a sucker for cavernous, reverb-drenched shit, and this is just so fucking amazingly produced. Again, I urge you guys, please listen to Catherine Wheel. The first 2 records tell you everything you need to know about what influenced Chino into moving in this particular direction. I understand that there's a lot to be said that this isn't as true to Deftones' core vision as an album like White Pony was. This is their least nu metal album. It's their least aggressive. But god damn it, if they can't match the menace with the beauty, and it's just such a fucking glistening record. In my opinion, I think that this record does more to pay homage to Chi Sheng than Diamond Eyes does. Maybe not as much lyrically, but sonically, it feels like they're still missing their dear friend. And that's not to diss on the bass work on this thing. Sergio is a different type of bassist, not as groovy, much more harmonically driven, but he's still one hell of a bassist. And I would argue that this is Sergio showing and paying his respects to Chi. This album is just so fucking good, and as a sucker for shoegaze music, this is much more up my alley, personally. And that's why this is the Deftones album that I give the grade S. Alright, let's get number 1 out of the way. Tragic Kingdom by No Doubt. Look, I know that some Zoomers still think that this thing has so much filler, it's kind of overrated because the millennials really rubbed it in their faces, and a lot of Zoomers just prefer Gwen's solo material over this. But this really is not just the band, but Gwen herself in top form. And look, I know that there's a lot of commentary about having to suffer for your art, but I really do feel like the band suffered for their art here. Because go figure, right in the middle of production when Gwen thought that everything was hunky-dory going great, Tony decided, yeah, Gwen, I'm breaking up with you. Yeah, I didn't really talk about that relationship throughout the rest of the discography list, but Tony and Gwen started the band as a couple, stayed together for the better part of a decade, and in 1995, Tony ultimately separated with Gwen because he didn't see a future with her. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Tony did anything malicious here, but Gwen clearly had the stars in her eyes for this man, even to the very very end, and you can hear how much her heart isn't just breaking, but is absolutely fucking shattered and smashed, and now it feels like the band is dancing on the pieces of her broken heart, including Gwen herself, for the record. And yes, a lot of these songs were written before the breakup. I mean, Spiderwebs and I'm Just a Girl were in rotation during live shows as early as 1993. But I don't think that this album would have as much tension on it if it weren't for that emotional turmoil. Look, it's kind of like Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. It wouldn't sound the way it did if people weren't glaring at each other from across the room. Imagine it like a giant metal spring. Two people are holding each side of the spring and they're walking in separate directions. This album is like imagining that spring being pulled to its absolute maximum without it completely breaking. That tension is the magic. I feel like all of these songs are the result of not just tension, but the progress that these musicians made over the past few years. The stellar musicianship on display here, especially the closing title track, where they just keep speeding up that tempo until it becomes this absolutely insane fucking carnival ride where it sounds inhuman how they're still keeping it together. It's proof that this is one of the quintessential 1990s bands. And don't even get me started with Don't Speak, which in my opinion is one of the greatest breakup songs ever written. It's painful, it's devastating. Gwen doesn't mince words. Her world is falling apart as a result of this relationship being ended. I feel like in the coming years, we'll probably see Tragic Kingdom enter the conversation as like one of the greatest albums ever made again. Even if for the time being, it's kind of exited that conversation. I'm good either ways, I don't care, I'm secure in my opinions, I'll give this thing an S. And there you have it. My November listens from last year finally brought to the table. We're heading into 2026 listens now. My February episode will be Odds and Ends month, which is basically me listening to all the side project and solo career projects of all the bands I've covered over the past few years. So please do keep an eye out for that, especially if you're curious about my thoughts on Chino Moreno's side projects. So I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.